Try to identify the components in this diagram. So here one block is there. Okay, this is actually a rectangular block, for example. It may be a rectangular block like this, inside which there is a cylindrical hole. So this is the cylindrical hole, and here this is the piston. This is the piston. Okay, and here the piston will move from top dead center to bottom dead center, and here this is the crank. Observe this. This is the crank, and this piston and crank are connected by means of this connecting rod. See, this is the connecting rod. So it consists of one big end and one small end. Okay, so cylinder, piston, connecting rod. Okay, so this entire thing is cylinder on which there is a cap. Observe this. This is the cap, and there are number of components are placed in the cap. We shall discuss in detail. Okay, so this cap covers the opening side of the cylinder so that the exhaust gases will not go outside. Sorry, the combustion gases will not go outside. Okay, and there are other certain mechanisms like camshaft. See here, this is the inlet valve. Here the diagram is not clear. The inlet valve will be like this. So this is that valve. So that is inlet valve. Okay, and this is called as exhaust valve. Okay, so here this valve is called as inlet valve, and here this valve is called as exhaust valve. We shall see one by one. And this is our piston, this is our connecting rod, and this is our crank, and this crank is mounted on this crankshaft. So there is a long shaft, there is a small shaft on which this crank is mounted. As the crank rotates, the crankshaft also rotates. Okay, and here this is called as camshaft, and this is cam, and this is follower, and this is called as rocker arm. This is called as rocker arm. Okay, see, this is the inlet valve. Just observe. Now this is the opening, for example. Okay, now tell me, is it in open position or closed position? It is in open position. When it moves upwards, it closes the opening. So like that it works here. So there is a passage. Susara, there is a passage into the cylinder called as inlet manifold. What is that? Yes, this is inlet manifold. And there is another passage which is called as exhaust manifold. It is called as exhaust manifold. Through inlet manifold, the fuel or the charge enters into the cylinder. And through this exhaust manifold, the exhaust gases will leave the cylinder. This inlet manifold can be opened and closed by using this inlet valve. This exhaust manifold can be opened and closed by using this exhaust valve. Is it clear? So how do you open and close the exhaust valve or inlet valve? If you move it downwards, it is open position. If you move it upwards, it is a closed position. So how do you move it downwards and upwards? So that is because of this mechanism. So that is called as timing mechanism, which consists of camshaft. This is the follower, and this is the rocker arm, and then this is the valve. See, Here, this is the rocker arm which is hinged at the middle. It is like this. Okay. If you move it downward, it will move upwards. If you move it downward, it will move upwards. Like that, it will move. Because of the action of the cam, when it moves upward, when the cam moves upwards, this rocker arm, this end will move upward, and this end will be moved downwards. So here this is connected to the inlet valve. That's why the inlet valve also moves downwards. So the manifold is open. And after some time, again this valve, this rod will move downward because of the action of the cam. Then what happens is, it is like this. It will be like this. Then what happens? The valve moves upwards and it is closed. In the same way, the exhaust valve is also opened and closed. Here if you observe, the inlet manifold and the exhaust manifold, where are they? Are they in the cylinder? No. See, yes, this is in the cylinder head. Both inlet manifold and exhaust manifold are in the cylinder head and also the valves. In addition, the center, there is a device called as spark plug. You might have seen spark plug in your motorcycles. So this spark plug is used to ignite the fuel, to ignite the charge inside the engine. Okay. So here the space above the piston is called as combustion chamber, where the combustion takes place and the combustion gases expands. As the combustion gas expands, it exerts the pressure on the piston and the piston will move downwards. Okay. Is everything clear? Now let us discuss one by one each and every part. Have you drawn this? So the first component is the cylinder block. So where is the cylinder block? From here to, not this one, from here to this one. This is the entire block. చూసారా, ఇది వేరు కాదు, ఇదంతా ఒక సిలిండ్రికల్ సెక్షన్. దాన్ని కట్ చేసి చూస్తున్నాం. ఓకే, రైట్. సో దిస్ ఈస్ ద మెయిన్ బాడీ ఆఫ్ ద engine, which houses all the components like piston, connecting rod, crank, crankshaft, everything. So it is the main body. This is the main body and houses major components of engine. And houses major components of the engine. Generally, it is made of cast iron. The material is cast iron. The cylinder block is made of cast iron, and some of the cylinder blocks may be made of aluminum, but mostly it is made of cast iron. Okay, generally grey cast iron or aluminum alloys. So that is about the cylinder block. So the cylinder block consists of a cylindrical hole inside in which the piston reciprocates. Okay, and that cylindrical hole is provided with linings. They are called as cylinder linings. This cylindrical hole is provided with linings called as cylinder linings. So what is the purpose of linings? If there is no lining, as the piston moves up and down, as the piston reciprocates, after some time the surface of the hole may be worn out. Then what happens? The size of the hole increases. Is it right or not? When the piston reciprocates continuously, after some time these surfaces may be worn out. So that's why the diameter will increase. Then what happens? Whatever be the combustion gases will escape through this gap into the bottommost space. That is called as crankcase. So that's why there is a power loss. So that's why in order to avoid this, it consists of cylinder liners. So cylinder liners is also cylindrical in shape. Okay. So they are provided inside the cylinder in which the piston is placed. So initially this is the hole and there is a cylinder liner which is inserted in the hole and then the piston is inserted. Even though the piston reciprocates, it reciprocates within the liners itself. So that if the liners are worn out, you can replace the liners easily. It is not possible to replace the entire cylinder block. It is easy to replace the liners because of its cost. Okay, so that is about liners. And this is about the cylinder block. And then the next item is cylinder. Cylinder is nothing but the cylindrical hole inside the cylinder block. Cylinder is nothing but the cylindrical hole inside the cylindrical block, cylinder block. Okay. So in this, the piston reciprocates up and down. Okay. And here the bottommost space is called as crankcase. So this space is called as crankcase. Chusara? Illa expand ayindi. So that is called as crankcase. Generally, this crankcase is used to house the crank and crankshaft. And in some engines, this is used to store the lubricating oil. So if you observe for motorcycles, you pour engine oil. So the place to which you are pouring engine oil is called as crankcase. Adi koncham bayatiki vachuntundi chusara? Right. Now, the next one is the cylinder head. So where is the cylinder head? Here is the cylinder head, which acts as cap to the cylinder. So acts as cap or cover to cylinder hole so that the gases will not go out. స్వామియే సన్నమయ్యప్ప పడుకుంటున్నాడు స్వామి తప్పదు మరి వినాలి. Okay. So here the cylinder head is also used to house various components like it consists of inlet manifold, exhaust manifold, inlet valve, exhaust valve and spark plug. Spark plug or fuel injector. Generally the spark plug is used in petrol engines. Fuel injector is used in diesel engines. Okay. So it acts as the cap or cover. It houses ఏంటంటే inlet valve, exhaust valve, spark plug or fuel injector. Okay. Well, so this is our cylinder block and it is also made of grey cast iron or aluminum alloy. So this is also grey cast iron or aluminum alloy. You have to write all these things when you are asked to write out the construction and working of engine. Is it okay? And the next component, the third one is piston. Piston is also a cylindrical element which is placed inside the hole, cylinder hole, which reciprocates between topmost position called as top dead center and the bottommost position called as bottom dead center. So it reciprocates between TDC and BDC. So it is responsible for getting the reciprocating motion from the gas, from the pressure of the gases, and then it imparts this motion to the connecting rod. So this is connected to the connecting rod, small end of the connecting rod. Okay, so that the motion is imparted to the connecting rod. So what is the shape of the piston? Cylindrical. Is it a solid cylinder or hollow cylinder? this is a hollow cylinder. In the sense, it is like this, and it consists of a hole in which the connecting rod is inserted, and there is a pin. So the connecting rod small end consists of a hole, and the piston also consists of a hole. So the small end is inserted like this from the bottom, so that both the holes are matched, and then there is a pin called as piston pin is inserted, so that it forms a joint is formed. Okay. Now as the piston moves, the connecting rod also moves. So this is the construction of the piston. And here this piston is also provided with piston rings. Entity. So piston reciprocates, and it is provided with piston rings. This piston consists of some slots over its periphery. Some slots over its periphery, in which these piston rings are inserted. The piston rings will be like this. Like this, the piston rings. What is the purpose of the piston rings? Actually, there is a gap between this wall and the piston. So these piston rings are used to fill the gap initially, and also the piston rings prevents the flow of gases into the crankcases. The flow of gases into the crankcases. If there is no piston rings, there is no obstruction for the gas. So the gap will be open, so that the whatever be the gases, they move into the crankcase. That's why there is a power loss. Are you following? Okay. Well, so these piston rings acts as a barrier for escape of exhaust combustion gases into the crankcase, right? And now this piston is also made of cast iron or aluminum alloy. Or aluminum alloy. Is it clear till now? Note చేసుకోండి. Well, the next part is connecting rod. So connecting rod connects the piston at the top and the crank at the bottom. Okay. So it connects piston at the top and crank at the bottom. So what is the function of connecting rod? It converts the reciprocating motion of the piston into rotary motion of the crank. So converts reciprocating motion of the piston to rotary motion of the crank. So what is the construction of this connecting rod? It will be like this. It consists of one end here and another end here. So there are two ends. One end is called as big end and small end. So it consists of a hole at both the ends. Okay. Now the small end is inserted into the piston. I already told you that the piston also consists of a hole. So it is inserted from the bottom, so that the hole of the small end in the connecting rod and the hole in the piston exactly matches each other, so that a pin can be inserted like this through the piston and the connecting rod. And at the other end, here this is the crank. This crank also consists of a hole. So here this big end hole and the small end hole are aligned each other, so that another pin is inserted in that holes, so that both connecting rod and the cranks are connected. Okay. The pin which is used to connect the piston and the connecting rod small end is called as piston pin. So here this is piston pin. and it is also called as gut joint pin. Okay, see, piston pin. Another name is gut joint pin. So which is used to connect piston and connecting rod. The other end is connected to the crank by using a pin called as crank pin. So connects connecting rod and crank. Is it clear? There are two pins which are inserted into the connecting rod. One is inserted at the small end to join piston, and the other one is inserted at the big end to join with the crank. So this one is called as piston pin or gut joint pin, and this one is called as crank pin. Okay, right. And then crank. The next part is crank. So what is the function of crank? This crank is mounted on the crankshaft. So this is the crankshaft on which the crank is mounted like this. As the crank rotates, the crankshaft also rotates. So it rotates the crankshaft. So it takes the rotary motion. So this is used to convert the rotary motion of the reciprocating motion of the piston into rotary motion. So this is the first element which gets the rotary motion in the entire setup. Okay, so it is rotated by the connecting rod big end. So it is rotated by connecting rod big end, and it is mounted on crankshaft. So as the crank rotates, the crankshaft also rotates. Okay, so this is crank, and then crankshaft. So what is the function of the crankshaft? It is driven by the crank. This crankshaft is driven by the crank. And at the outside of the engine, there is a shaft called as driving shaft. This crankshaft is connected to the driving shaft. See, if you observe in a IC engine, you can observe a shaft which is projecting outward from the engine. So that is called as driving shaft. So driving shaft is connected to the crankshaft, so that the rotary motion is taken from the crankshaft. Okay. Well, so that is about the crankshaft. And the next one is camshaft. See here, this is the camshaft. This camshaft is in turn connected to the crankshaft. So it gets the motion from the crankshaft itself by using some gearing arrangements. So ఈ రెండింటికి మధ్య some gears ఉంటాయి. Gears ద్వారా ఇది తిరిగితే ఇది కూడా తిరుగుతూ ఉంటుంది. కాకపోతే ఏంటంటే it rotates at half the speed of this crankshaft. Crankshaft, for example, if it rotates say 1000 rpm, the camshaft rotates at 500 rpm. Okay, so that is camshaft. What is the purpose of camshaft? It is used for timing of valves. Timing of valve means timely opening and timely closing of both inlet and exhaust valve. So inlet and exhaust valves are to be operated as per a fixed schedule or time. So you should not open or close it as and when you need. It must be opened at proper time and closed at proper time. So that I am going to explain in the further lessons. So for that purpose, this entire camshaft and cam setup is used. Okay, well, and then crankcase. So this is the space available at the bottom of the engine which houses the crankshaft and the big end of the connecting rod. Okay, and also it acts as a reservoir for the lubricating oil. Lubricating oil is nothing but our engine oil. So from here, each and every part is lubricated. The oil is circulated through each and every moving component. Okay. And then valves. There are two valves. One is inlet valve and exhaust valve. Both are not made of same material. Here, the exhaust valve is made of a different material which can withstand high temperatures, because the inlet valve is subjected to the low temperatures because only fuel will enter at normal temperature. But the exhaust gases are flowing through the exhaust manifold, so which are at high temperature. That's why it must be able to withstand the high temperature. So generally this inlet valve is made of nickel chromium alloy. This inlet valve is made of nickel chromium alloy, and this is made of silicon chrome steel.